Ron Bridges from St. Catharines, which is in Ontario, asks, can you inform your audience about the numbers and situation of prisoners held by Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I assume you're talking about prisoners of war. Um, the Russians, of course, have captured far more Ukrainians than the Ukrainians have captured Russians. Many of the Ukrainians that have been captured by Russia are being held and prosecuted or investigated for potential war crimes, and they'll be prosecuted. Others are purely military in nature and will be exchanged at some point in time. The Russians treat the Ukrainian prisoners of war in total conformity with the laws of war. They're well fed, they're well taken care of, they're given medical attention. The Russian prisoners of war are abused, tortured, some shot, some murdered, because the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military is a criminal organization, and the abuse of the Russians is real. The Ukrainians view the Russians as less than human. They call them orcs, and they abuse them. The Russians treat the Ukrainians as fellow Slavs, as equals in terms of status. And unless you committed a crime, you'll be well fed. You'll be exchanged. Every Ukrainian that's been returned is in looking okay. If they're wounded, their wounds have been dealt with. They've been stabilized. Limbs have been saved. The Russians, they come back and they've been psychologically traumatized. They've been beaten. They've been starved. It's just, again, something most Americans need to reflect on, is that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military has aligned itself with an odious ideology of Banderism, which is akin to the white supremacy of the Aryan German nation. The Western Ukrainians especially are afflicted with this disease. They believe they are a superior race, and they treat the Russians as ethnically inferior, and they torture them, they kill them, they view them as subhumans. And why we support this is beyond me.
Odious.
All right, let's take some live questions coming in now. We have somebody calling in on the phone. Hopefully this will work. Hello, caller, are you there?
Questions coming in.
David.
Somebody calling in on the phone.
Okay, David, what's your question?
Hello, caller, are you there?
Yeah, hello. Love you, Scott Ritter.
Okay, David, what's your question?
Some people, some journalists.
Hey, David, lower your audio. I should have said this before. Turn off the speaker on your computer so we don't hear feedback, okay?
Correct. Okay, sorry about that.
No,
Some
my fault
people-
for not saying it. Go ahead.
Okay. Some people, some journalists say that human rights record in Russia is dismal. I doubt that. But I'd just like to hear, what do you think about Russia's human rights record for the last 25 years? How would you evaluate it, characterize it? Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
Yep. No, good question. The problem comes when you try to mirror image American standards onto Russian reality. It would be the same problem in reverse if you tried to mirror image Russian standards on American reality. What are human rights? What are basic human rights? The Russians believe that human rights include a right to an education, a right to health care, a right to housing, things of this nature. In the United States, we put a lot of emphasis on freedom. We speak of the right to speak. We speak of focusing on individual rights, and if somehow an individual is denied specific rights, that this becomes a human rights abuse. But when I compare and contrast the two societies, America, which is supposed to be this ultimate defender of human rights, what are the human rights of the people that are today, right now, just 5 miles away from me, homeless, living in cardboard boxes? Are their human rights being respected? What are the human rights of the people that can't afford health care? And so they're cutting back on their medicine and they're slowly killing themselves because they're getting insufficient medical care. What are the human rights of people who went to college and have incurred $120,000 in debt as a 24-year-old entering a labor market where they can't, where they're not going to ever be able to earn enough money to pay off this debt. So their entire life is going to be spent with the stress of living under this debt burden. We talk about human rights as if, Alexei Navalny is some sort of, human rights, symbol, the persecution, the prosecution of Alexei Navalny. He's scum personified. First of all, I mean, people need to understand that, this is not a good guy. He Mr. Corruption Fighter. And I take umbrage because, again, my wife is from Georgia, but he called Georgians cockroaches. He's a white supremacist, a white nationalist. He said the best way to deal with Muslims in Russia is to exterminate them, implying bug spray, except that the little video clip he did, he pulls out a pistol and he shoots them. And he thinks this is good. This is a man who was recruited by the CIA for the purpose of bringing down Vladimir Putin. You don't have human rights in terms of political freedom when you are working for a foreign power to usurp the legitimate political authority of your country. So we have to be careful when we talk about human rights. The Russians live in a society that is fundamentally different from ours. They have different history, different culture, different expectations. And I think most Russians would agree that the standard of human rights is quite high in Russia because they focus on different things. As I said, are you hungry at the end of the day? Do you have an education? Are the children being taken care of? Is there health care? These are fundamental human rights. But in the United States, we tend to focus on, are you allowed to say and do what you want to say and do? And if somehow this is oppressed, your human rights are being violated. But no, and then we focus on the court system. Your human rights are violated if you're being prosecuted. In Russia, are there violations? I'm sure there are. Are there violations in the United States? I'm sure there are. I know there are. So I just think we need to be careful trying to compare an American standard with a Russian reality, because the two don't mix. Russia, I guess, from an American perspective, people could make a claim that there are human rights violations in Russia. I will tell you this: the Russia that I experienced was populated by a free people who woke up in the morning free to do, for the most part, what they wanted to do. They have constitutional protections, full employment. They not worrying about health care where that if they get sick, how are they going to afford this? The quality of life is quite high, and it compares well with the quality of life of mainstream America. And again, I would say in some cases it's even better because these people aren't, burdened by the constant strain of healthcare, education. Are they going to have a home, a roof over their head next month if they miss a payday? So, human rights is one of those terms that can be abused. Do I believe that Russia should ensure that its citizens are taken care of properly? Of course I do. Do I think the Russians have a right to voice complaints or opposition to policies by the Russian government that they perceive infringe on their human rights? Of course I do. I believe all this. But the United States, that's not what we do. We use human rights as a sword. We use it as a weapon. We weaponize human rights in the hypocrisy of this, because again, we attack Russia for doing X, Y, and Z while we do the same thing back here at home to our own people. We have no moral authority to do this. We tolerate governments torturing people. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where we would go to Europe and illegally kidnap people off the streets, send them to Guantanamo or to Bagram or to secret facilities in Lithuania and Poland to be tortured under the guidance of the CIA, an American government organization, tortured. So America really has no right to talk about human rights, none whatsoever. So if you hear an argument being articulated by an American government official about human rights abuses overseas, turn down the volume, because it just doesn't matter. There's no moral authority there. Before America can start lecturing people about human rights, they really have to start.
Ryan Wilson in Austin, Texas.
Okay, we have another phone call coming in live. Go ahead, caller.
Hey, it's Ryan in Austin, Texas.
Hi,
Can
Ryan.
you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear Ryan, Scott? Yep, we can hear you, Ryan. Would you
All
like?
right.
Well, he didn't say anything. That's why you didn't hear him.
Was the question, could I hear Ryan? I have to think about this one, Jeff, but I think I heard Ryan. Ryan, call back.
You don't hear him now?
What about arm wrestling in every Russian city?
Hang on a
Well,
second.
that's the question.
All right, I'm sorry. We got it. Ryan, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, we did. Still learning how to make these phone calls work. Can you just start again? I think you, Scott, you'll be able to hear him now. Go ahead, Ryan. Start from the beginning.
All right. Starting from the beginning. So I am the person that I think won the arm wrestle contest in Austin, Texas against Scott, Ryan. And I have a comment about the trip. One is that I don't think I saw very many arm wrestling contests in Russia. So, you know, I don't know if one side or the other was afraid. I don't know. But what I really am interested in is your follow-on visit to Russia. And, you know, certainly everybody there, rightly so, respects you, Scott, and the work that you're doing. But for example, in my discussions with Russians, they just like Americans don't really have a good idea of who Americans are in relation to Russia. So for example, the view is Texans like barbecue, they like to shoot, and they're really good looking, and they arm wrestle really well. Now that's true, but what a lot of people don't know is that there was a long history, even through the World War II, of Russian-American friendship. And I bring this up because it's not just enough to say, well, we're against Joe Biden, we're against Joe's war. Kind of brings up to mind, when you were here, the discussion with Mr. Lukanov. I found some old discussions during World War II, and there was a quote from Franklin Roosevelt. This is sort of what I'm asking about, what your next trip will be. Is that going to be similar? Are you going to have an entourage of people who maybe understand a little bit more about American-Russian friendship so that you can broaden the process that you've begun? But the quote from Franklin Roosevelt, he was asked by his son, and I don't remember exactly the year, but he said the war is going to be won sooner or later. And Franklin Roosevelt said, the unity that we have made for war is nothing to the unity we will have to build for peace. And he said, after the war, that's when the cry will come that our unity is no longer necessary. That's when the job will begin in earnest. And so it seems to me that's sort of what you're doing, even though the conflict is raging, even though it appears Americans and Russians at a certain level don't get along, that there's a much bigger fight. And it seems like you're going to need more Americans with you to carry that message. So that's my question. If you got
That's not a question. That's a speech. That's a speech, not a question.
Come on, there's got to be a question in there.
All right, Scott.
Let's see if Scott figures out my question.
Scott, you can handle it however you want. I call that a speech, but go ahead.
Well, I just have a fundamental problem with anybody who manufactures history. First of all, the evidence clearly shows that the arm wrestling contest, there's no conclusion to it. So you've gone ahead and violated an agreement that we both had, that there would be no speculation. And believe me, if you claim that you won, it's pure speculation. So we're gonna have to work on this. I mean, we have a rough start right now, because if you want to be on an entourage, there's got to be trust, and we're running into that lack of trust. But now to get on to the serious aspect of your question, you're 100% right. What I've said all along, and I said it my entire time in Russia, is that Victoria and I were on a journey, and it was a lonely journey, just the two of us, together with our traveling companions, going across Russia. But it began a process. I'd like to believe that every city that we went to, when we left, there was a buzz, that people continued to talk about what had happened, what they experienced, and there's that old saying, you got to strike while the iron's hot. So some preparatory work was done to prepare Russia for this kind of interaction. But if it's allowed to stagnate, then it was all for nothing. Then it just becomes a glorified vacation or a glorified trip. There has to be follow-on. What that follow-on will be is unknown and unknowable at this juncture. My hosts were kind enough to articulate the possibility of a winter tour, but it's expensive, and I'm not going to allow this to happen again. I went there with a book tour, and it was good. But if there's going to be a repeat, there's
a lot of work going on there for that.
There's got to be we've got to find a way to make it fair in terms of the burden sharing of the but the other thing is to have more people go there too, that this isn't just the Scott Ritter show, although this is the Scott Ritter show, but the idea of, well, if you want it, Jeff, you can have it, but it says ScottRitterExtra.com. It doesn't say JeffNormanExtra.com. If you want to take over the show, change the name. I'm all for it. Trust me, I'm willing to hand off this mantle. But my point is, the more people we can get to Russia, the better. There's some dialogue taking place between myself and the organizers on what that could constitute, what different things. It doesn't have to be one thing, it can be several, but Ryan, you're 100% right. We need to broaden the scope and scale of the involvement. The more Americans we can get over there, the better. I would say that we need to be cognizant of the fact that, remember, the CIA just put out the dumbest video in the history of dumb videos, where they're making this pitch about wanting Russians to betray. So we have to be careful about how we go about doing this. There has to be a plan of action. There has to be goals. There has to be objectives, but they have to be realistic in nature. And they have to be Russian driven. Remember, we're going to their country. It's not what we want to achieve in their country. It's what they want to achieve in their country. Because otherwise it looks like we're trying to dictate a solution to a problem that we made. Because right now the fundamental problems between Russia and the United States is because of bad policy of the American government, policy that has been sustained, in some ways facilitated by the indifference of the American public. And so while the Russians are receptive to having a dialogue and such, I think they would be resistant to Americans coming in and trying to dictate an outcome. I think what's important for any American going to Russia is to be in listening mode as opposed to preaching mode, that we should go over there and empower ourselves, listen, inform ourselves, because most of the change is going to have to take place here in America. This is where the work needs to be done. The Russians are ready. we really don't have to hit the on switch in Russia to get them to be prepared to have better relations with us. They're there right now. These people know our history. There's not the equivalent of Russophobia in America, in against Americans in Russia. There's some animosity, there's some resentment that's building up, but it's not based upon an ignorance of America. They know us very well. So I think, if we're going to do this, continuation of going to Russia, we just have to be cognizant of the fact that this is not about us trying to get the Russians to do something. This is about us learning about the Russians so that we can bring it back to the United States and make the changes here at home that are necessary for betterment of relations.
Okay, Ryan, thanks for calling. Talk to you soon. We love you.
That are necessary.
Yep. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye. All right, Scott, can we take a couple of quick ones from YouTube and Facebook?
We can do a couple more, but then I'm going to have to go to bed. So
Okay, yeah, it's getting late. This is a long one. Darius King, thanks for the donation. We certainly appreciate it. Why doesn't the United States continue the F-22 fighter program? Seems like very extractive-looking plan. Whatever that means, extractive.
Well, I think the F-22 is expensive, and it's not as good as we claim it to be. It's one thing to fly an airplane in non-threatening environment. You can get it to do fancy things. You can get it to roll over and bark and whatever tricks you want to put in an airplane. It's another thing to talk about real-world combat against an enemy that is flying equivalent planes. It's a very difficult plane to maintain. It costs a lot of money to do it right. And frankly speaking, it's just not as good as everybody thinks it is. So I think the U.S. Air Force is right to talk about let's move on from the F-22. But what are they going to move on to? The F-35, which is even worse. I think one of the lessons of the Ukraine conflict is that the need for these fifth generation fighters it's not there anymore. You can accomplish a lot of what needs to be accomplished by using upgraded Gen 4 fighters. An F-18 mod would be able to deliver much of the ordnance that an F-35 or an F-22 can do. Dogfighting, there's a lot of emphasis on dogfighting, but the real key is over the horizon engagement, and this is done as a system, not necessarily focusing on one airplane. We need to start to simplify air-to-air combat. We've turned it into this overly complicated thing, and the problem is, again, what we're learning in Ukraine is that this isn't going to be like fighting against the Taliban or Iraqi insurgents. This is fighting against enemies going to shut down connectivity. If you knock out satellites, the F-22 doesn't work. If you knock out satellites, the F-35 doesn't work. And satellites will be knocked out. So we probably need to start focusing on systems that don't cost as much. We can't afford these things. That's the other thing is we have to understand is that we're pricing ourselves out of war. We spend more money than anybody else in the world on defense, but we're not getting the same bang for the buck because we're building these systems, the F-22, the F-35, now the B-21 Raider bomber. They're just so expensive and they're not survivable. We're dealing with a mindset that dates back to the late 1970s, early 1980s, where stealth was supposed to be the big deal. It ain't. Okay, everything is detectable. The Russians today have anti-air systems that pick up the F-35 as if it was glowing red hot. There's no such thing as stealth anymore. Not when you're dealing with a peer level, opponent. And the Russians are peer level. They have some of the finest technology in the world. So I think there's a recognition now by the U.S. Air Force that we're just deluding ourselves. It's delusional to think that we can produce a fighter that has stealth aspects to it, and is able to accomplish A, B, C, and D. It can't. The F-22 can't do anything right. I mean, it's a fancy airplane. It's very expensive, but you could make a better air-to-air fighter if you just stopped pretending that stealth was a thing. And so I think that's the direction the Air Force is going.
All right, let's take just one more question, and then let Scott go Betty by. Thank you so much, Scott, for your time. You're absolutely Herculean in your efforts, and we appreciate it. Just wanted to give folks a little bit more chance since we talked so much about your trip. Here is a question for Mr. Ritter. Did you get Mr. Norman his bottle of red dessert wine? Well, nobody ever specified it had to be dessert wine, but anyway, I'll let you. We both know the answer to that question, but I'll let you answer it, Scott.
Yes.
Okay. And it was great. It was great.
But you could do one more question.
All right. Because that wasn't really about issues of the day. One more question, Ann. Pick a good one. How is the home? Oh, that's a good one. Eric Suarez. He's a regular. Hi, Eric. How you doing? How is the homeless situation in Russia?
I mean, it's there. I mean, I have to be honest. In Moscow, there were. I saw one person sleeping on a bench. In Sebastopol, I saw another person sleeping on a bench. So, like any society, you have people that that fall through the safety net and are out there on their own. The difference is that in Russia, those people are going to be picked up and they're going to be taken to shelter and they're going to be given the assistance. They're not going to be allowed to sit there and die on the street. And so the Russians have the homeless situation very much under control. You know that having a again we talk about human rights, but having a home is a right in Russia. It's a right. The state is to provide you, make sure you have the ability to have a home. So yeah, there is no homeless problem in Russia, not compared to what we have here in the United States.
All right. That was an interesting question. Glad we squeezed that in. Thank you again, Scott. Really appreciate it. We know it's been a very long week for you. A lot of stuff that's going on, a lot of work. Thank you for spending time with us. And we will be back again on Tuesday with the lightning round. Join us on our other podcast, Scenes from the Evolution, on Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks to Ann Moss for curating the comments backstage. Great job, Ann. And Scott looks like he wants to say something or is engaging in some kind of weird sign language.
Well, you've trained me well, Jeff. That I don't talk over you anymore because you've sufficiently chided me for that rude behavior.
Now instead you make gestures over me now. That's a slight improvement. Okay.
Yeah. So no, I've been gone a month. So what happened to your leaky cup?
Oh, well, I don't think that's something that's like an every show occurrence. We're going to use that on occasion, but what's the point of doing it every time? What's the need?
Because it's funny.
Because it's funny. It's funny if I forget about it and I spill wine all over the place. But I've learned my lesson, and I don't know. I was in the mood to drink a rather bountiful quantity tonight, and not to restrain myself at all. And I think it went well. In the spirit of the moonshine, my friends in Russia and their moonshine. This is my way of bonding with our Russian friends.
Where is Maverick? Maverick is sleeping next to Voldemort.
Yeah, you used her real name about 5 times today. You're going to get.
Yeah, I know. My
you're out of practice.
My standards are out. I've got to get retrained and reprogrammed. And I think the one thing that Marina is going to retrain me on is when I look up, we've been on for 2 hours and 25 minutes, and she's going to be like, "It's a 2-hour show, boy. 2-hour show."
No, that's my fault. I just decided that to do it because we talked so much about the Russia trip. I didn't want our beloved audience to feel like they got gypped. So I made an executive decision. I apologize if it was the wrong decision. Gregory
Never the wrong decision.
Smiley is happy though.
All right.
All right. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her. All the best to Mother Russia. Thanks to everybody for watching. We'll see you next Tuesday. Take care, everybody.